Hey, sixth graders, here is some, wanted to give you guys some extra information about this vocabulary list. So if we see here, there are a bunch of different words that are related to ancient Egypt. This is our first list of many. I'm just going to go through and give you some visuals to provide support for each of these vocabulary words. Your task with this activity is you have the terms, you have definitions, and then what you're going to do is for each definition, you're going to highlight or underline keywords, right? You're going to write out your keywords, and then you're going to have a visual. Now, the picture, a lot of people do a lot of thinking and get frustrated with this, but what I want you to remember is keep it simple and keep it relative to what you believe could remind you of what that vocabulary word is. So the first one is cataract. And a cataract is basically a waterfall. We also hear the word cataract related to something with your eye, but in this case it's a cataract. And along the Nile River there are cataracts. This is an example of one right here. What you'll notice is the river becomes very narrow, very difficult to navigate. You call a river that you can navigate, a navigable river. All right, so this poses kind of a hazard. And then you have other ones, like this is the first one, where you have a series of rapids and then that come from this cataract, this waterfall in the Nile River. Here's another example. They're just kind of spots where it gets kind of tricky to navigate. Here's another example. If you see kind of the river, the width of the river gets smaller. So it's a cataract, which is a waterfall. All right. The next one is delta, which is an area near a river's mouth where the water deposits fine soil and is beneficial for growing crops. So another one of our vocabulary words, black sand. Black sand is what's deposited around deltas and when the Nile floods. Black sand is awesome because it has tons of minerals that are very, very, especially even today, very good for growing crops and then can be used by different companies in manufacturing. So to give you an example, this is like kind of the black sand. It's actually literally black and dark, and it's super fertile and has lots of nutrients that make growing food and growing agriculture goes way, way easier. So that's black sand, and that's usually around the Nile River Delta. All right, next one is silt, which is fine soil deposited by a river flooding. So what would happen is every year the Nile River is going to flood. It floods for a series of time. It goes up many, many, many feet, covers lots of land, farming land, and then when the water recedes, that's when the farmers go in, they start planting food. And this silt is very high in nutrients as well, and good for growing food. Next one is fertile. All right, fertile is a word you've probably seen before, which is soil that is good for growing crops. So for instance, black sand is very good for growing crops, and this silt has lots of nutrients, things like nitrogen that are very, very good in terms of agriculture. The next one is Nile River, which is a river, a body of moving water in eastern Africa, the longest river in the world. It's 4,000 miles long, which flows north from Lake Victoria and empties into the Mediterranean. 90% of the Egyptian population lives along this body of water. Just here's a map of the Nile River. This is the delta, right? If you think about this as an arm and this is a hand, and all these are different tributaries that empty out into the Mediterranean Sea. Another thing you'll notice here too is that all of these cities are along the river, which is telling us that really, if you're living out here, if you're living in this desert, it's very, very hard to. So if you see all of these very, very old cities like Alexandria, Rosetta, Giza, Cairo, the capital, Memphis, which was the capital in ancient Egypt, right? All of these kind of end up, and you'll notice a lot of the pyramids that we'll study are along the Nile River. They're not just in the middle of nowhere because they need the water for survival. Okay. Another example, another picture that's really good to just see the whole span of the Nile River, 4,000 miles. So the Nile River originates down here in Lake Victoria, which is not in the country of Egypt today, all the way down here in Tanzania and Kenya. And actually it starts as two different branches. There's the White Nile and the Blue Nile, and they converge here. Notice there's a city here, and then they flow north into the Mediterranean Sea. This land down here is of higher elevation than here, and this is sea level, right? So that's why the river flows north. and a lot of people think it flows south, but it actually flows north. All right, Upper Egypt, region is a large area with unifying characteristics that surrounds the Nile River south of the city of Cairo. So if we look down here, Cairo is up here. All of this area here is considered Upper Egypt. And it's Upper Egypt because it's the beginning of the river. Lower Egypt is the region that surrounds the Nile River Delta. So if we go here and look, here's the Nile Delta. This is all considered Lower Egypt, which you think about like lower south, but in this case, Lower Egypt is north of Upper Egypt. All right, black sand is the area along the Nile River that had a fine silt deposited, the only place where crops could grow. And then red sand is the red land that was isolated desert that protected Egypt on two sides. All right, so an example of the red sand is this. I mean, it's the desert on either side. The sand is literally red, but it lacks any nutrients and the things that farmers needed, like access to water, in order to grow food there. So as a result, areas where there's this red sand, right, not a lot of people live there. It's very challenging to live. The conditions are not conducive to growing any type of crops. So that is a visual for you. Now, in terms of the key words, right, for cataract, you're going to underline waterfall, okay, and draw a little waterfall. You can pick more than one word, right? You can, deposits fine soil, growing, right? Silt, soil, deposit, okay? What you're going to do is you'll write your keywords here and then draw your visuals, okay? If you have any questions, feel free to email me or give me a call over the weekend. Thank you so much, students, and happy vocabulary.